Okay, we are about to start with the final session tonight, which is standing between us and nice wine cocktail in this hot room. So,
Dobro večer sa moje strane. Ovo je zaista velika čast za mene da moderiram ovaj panel sa kolegama i koleginicama i da vidim mnoge prijatelji i kolege koji su ovde večeras, posebno mnogo mladih ljudi. So, welcome on my behalf. As Jonathan Wolf said, I also have a bit of a faster heartbeat to be in this lovely room with such esteemed colleagues and friends. And I would also like to second what he said about the importance of ceremony, because these are moments when time stops for a few seconds and when we can reflect on what has been and what is. And this panel hopefully gives us a chance. We have about an hour to discuss a few issues in a conversation with the colleagues, and Etienne Balibar is with us, as you see here virtually, in his Parisian apartment, which also brings an additional very nice moment to us. The theme of the conference is change, and my first reflection, given my age, was to remember that there was a journal in Paris in the late 60s and 70s called Change, and then Change International that was, I was surprised to see, led by someone called Jean-Pierre Faye, who is still alive at the age of 95. Meaning to say that this has always been a topic that has worked the intellectual minds, but also the practical minds. And I cannot not reflect on what Axel said, and in full disclosure, as you already heard, we have known each other for more than 40 years, and we met in a land that no longer exists, called Yugoslavia, in Dubrovnik in '81, because we were both drawn to the seminar called Philosophy and Social Science that was led by Jürgen Habermas, Zagorka Golubovic, Albrecht Wellmer, Agnes Heller, the Budapest School, and many American colleagues, and the list would be too long. But I will mention Anthony Giddens, because he was one of the rare British people who came, John Keane as well, who wrote a book on civil society. And there, effectively, we were exposed to the critical thinking and engagement and the latest ideas of, to put a general term, the progressive thought of the time. And in fact, we were together directors at the end in 1989 of that course, inheriting the heavy and honored mantle of the Habermases of this world. And I think that really gave us, as Axel rightly said, a lot of food for thought for what would later come and to interpret the world that is. Change, as Petar Bojanic this morning said in his opening remarks, is a complex and very open concept where a lot can fit in. And given that we're talking both about theory and practice and practice and theory, as we heard, both in the speeches and lectures that Axel Honneth and Jonathan Wolf gave this morning, one cannot not dissociate oneself from the moment, the historical moment that we live. And beyond theory, of course, the world is dramatically changed. Just a few days ago, the elections to the European Parliament has given much more voice to the far right in a variety of European capitals, and thus also in the European Parliament. Not much will change because the mainstream will still be in power. Change also happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign European country. Totally unexpected, no one knew it would happen, and here we are into a third year of war. Then there was, of course, the terrorist attack of Hamas on October 7th, in Israel and then the ensuing war that Israel is pursuing on the territory of Gaza and against the Palestinians. Not to go into the technological revolution that we are living, the fourth technological revolution, everything that it will or will not provoke with all of our cell phones that we barely leave for an instant, and even in circumstances like these, we cannot resist picking them up every sort of 20 minutes just to see if anything has happened dramatically. Of course, we would know if anything dramatically happened even without our cell phones. And then, of course, we await change, possibly change in the United States with the presidential election. We have the dramatic decision of President Macron to go forward with parliamentary elections in, well, just about over 2 weeks' time on the 30th of June in France. It's a gamble. Being a French student myself, I'm following very carefully, as we all are, because potentially this is a game-changing moment, whichever way it goes in France, because France is a key European country, along with Germany and others. Unfortunately, the UK has left the European Union, but is still a major player on the European continent in a variety of ways, not least security and defense. So, not to belabor this, I would like to first go to Paris and to Etienne, if I may, and to ask him...
of course you may.
Sorry?
Of course you may. Of course you may.
Merci beaucoup, Etienne. And to ask you, you know, I'll try and keep these questions rather, they may seem as platitudes, but I think they allow for going in depth on some of the big issues. You have been at this intersection of theory and practice and have been looking at the fate of the downtrodden. You have looked at how the French Revolution, for example, was one of these moments of dramatic change when simply people do not have another option than to go out into the street. How do you see this moment in time, and what would you see being some of the reasons why in France there was this huge result that the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen achieved? Easy question.
You're throwing us directly into the biggest difficulties of this moment. Right now, if I'm trying in the little time that I have kept for this kind of work to write something on what is taking place in France. So a lot of commentators are describing what happened 3 days ago and what is taking place now as a big surprise. And at the same time, you used the term yourself, they are describing President Macron's initiative to call for anticipated and I might say improvised elections, now something like a gamble. Now the first thing I would like to say, I'll be brief because I'm speaking from afar, and etc., is of course it's a trauma in many respects, especially for people like me and many friends, intellectuals and others who consider themselves progressive on the left, as we used to say, a category that comes from the French Revolution that you mentioned. So we were surprised in a sense, but on the other hand, we should not have been so surprised, because what's happening now is a consequence of situations and events and tendencies which have been long on their way, which have been working for a long time, and which are now so to speak crystallizing. And so this is part, of course, of a global phenomenon. I would not enter the discussion whether the French Rassemblement National or Front National, which is now gathering around itself in a few days an alliance of other right-wing and extreme right-wing organization, whether they should be called populist, whether they should be called fascist or neo-fascist. The same discussions are taking place about forces in Germany, about forces in Italy, and so on. They all have roots in a certain extremely dark moment of the European tradition, but they are also using a new language and taking advantage of new situations. Now, they've been on the rise for a number of reasons. The form in which globalization is taking place that produces a very strong and violent counter reaction of a nationalist type. This leads me also to returning to the old debates in the Marxist and internationalist tradition. What should we make of the category nation? For a long period, I was myself, I must confess, in the camp of those for whom not only nationalism, but even the category nation itself was somehow forbidden, anathema, and purely negative. I'm revising my my conceptions on this. So at the very least, I'm asking whether we should not need a more dialectical vision. And then there are other, of course, causes among sociological changes and so on, but among which I would list the, and I think there are equivalents in other countries, list the fact that a process of not post-democracy but de-democratization has taken place in a country like ours. So the government is increasingly technocratic. That fits very well, of course, with the neoliberal agenda. And on the other side, you've seen in France, like in other countries in the last period, a number of remarkable, albeit sometimes anarchic, I would say in the descriptive sense, attempts at recreating something like active participation of the citizens, the Yellow Jackets, others, and so on and so on. And this has been crushed, or it has been neglected and despised by the, I would say, established political class. Now, the Front National or Rassemblement National is harvesting, in a sense, the disenchantment and disappointment that comes from all these negative experiences. And of course, we are paying the price. Now, the question is whether something like a reaction, a surge, an initiative gathering forces on democratic forces in the broad sense, because this is a real danger, will crystallize in a very short time. And for me, as somebody who for a number of reasons has considered myself a European federalist all my life, although I am not a great fan of the way in which sometimes the European Union is governed. I also believe that it would be crucial to find ideas and forms of action in close collaboration with other citizens and other forces in other European countries. France ought not to neither France, nor Italy, nor Germany, nor any other country should face the challenge in an isolated manner. Okay, I think I'll stop there because I probably spoke too much, and I am not sure if I answered your question, but this is what I wanted to say.
You certainly did. Thank you. Thank you very much. And what's clear to all of us is that in this changing world, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better. We're not quite sure. What's sure is that we are in times of uncertainty, of complexity and volatility. The business world calls it the VUCA, V-U-C-A world, ambiguity. They have, in business, confronted this, but now we're confronting it on a very large social scale. I'd like to turn to you, Axel, now, and stating the obvious that the term recognition has been one of the pillars of your theoretical work early on and remains a key category. Has the problem been that there's been diminishing recognitions of citizens' rights, interests, the rising inequality that we've seen across the Western world in particular, has led to the fear that is instilled in people because we're reading for the past 15 years titles in newspapers saying, well, automation and artificial intelligence will replace 50% of jobs. And maybe on the tail end of this, you are, as we heard, a professor at Columbia University. Over the years, there's been talk about academic freedom, free spaces, and we've all followed the protests on American campuses. What is the atmosphere in terms of academic freedom in a campus like Columbia?
Yep. To present unexpected questions. Yeah, I would like to come after I have answered your question to what I wanted originally to say about change now, but it's very hard to decide. I think the situation in the US is still somewhat a little bit better than the situation in Germany with regard to academic freedom. In Germany, the situation is extremely complicated because of our own history. So the sensitivity with regard to what are called anti-Semitic speeches, anti-Semitic expressions, hate speech, the sensitivities are much higher than in the United States. On the other side, you have in the United States much more people, especially in New York and especially at Columbia, because we had Edward Said there, who created a Center for Palestinian Studies. So we have at Columbia a lot of Palestinian students, Arabic students, so you could expect the heating of the controversy. To my own experience, it wasn't as bad as it was portrayed by the press and by the media, because on the campus itself, we had relatively peaceful relationship between the two groups. I hope I'm not over-portraying the situation. When there was heat coming in and what can be called hate speech or anti-Semitic signs of anti-Semitic reactions mostly came from the outside, which means outside the Columbia campus there were organized groups from both sides which tried to infiltrate and to heat up the situation on the campus. To my own experience, both sides, the pro-Palestinian students and the Jewish students, in the majority, were relatively peaceful. They even found arrangement, which I found perfect, namely that they would tolerate from each side, on the one side the pro-Palestinian camp, and on the other side the Jewish students having flags for each killed person in the attacks by the Hamas. So there was an arrangement, there was a peaceful kind of coexistence between the two groups. And I think the main mistake was the reaction by the university under the pressure of especially the Republican Party, which is trying to attack academic freedom. I mean, they are leading a war against the academic institutions because they think the academic institutions, higher education, are the birthplace of left-wing thinking, of what they call socialist thinking, radicalism, or whatever. So the presidency, the administration at Columbia was under pressure from these groups, sometimes relatively right-wing Jewish groups, which also exist, and mainly Republicans, who use it as let's say, enforcing their struggle against everything which they think is radical thinking. So that's the situation as I saw it. Now, only very few words about what Etienne was already talking about. I think when you asked the question of change, and we are realizing now, after the shocking events of the elections was it last Sunday? Yeah, I thought it's longer ago. It has a kind of traumatic effect on every one of us. So I think the real question we have to ask as being progressivists, a notion I take from Etienne now, which means those who believed that change has to be understood as progress in certain respects, namely as an increase in equality of life chances, equality of inclusion in the democratic process, and increase in individualization, which means better chances for everyone to articulate his or her own personality. So every one of us who believed in the fact that these are the central developmental lines of the further development in Western Europe, in the United States, or wherever, has learned now that this is not the case. I have to say, it's for the first time in my life. I was born 49 like you, I'm sorry to mention it. And I grew up, and I never revised it, with the deep expectation that what the direction of my own time is progress in the direction I just mentioned. Yeah? I grew up, and I have to say, I still was thinking in such progressive terms, let's say, up until 10 years ago. After '89, I persisted in believing that we are living in a time in a progressive time, in a time which will, be it shorter or later, will develop equality in all the respects I just mentioned. Yeah, an increase in equality, an increase in inclusion, an increase in individualization. What I learned almost traumatically, so the trauma is a little bit longer ago than since last Sunday, but what I had to realize is that that has stopped, and we are in a moment of counter movements. I think counter movement was also, counter reaction was the notion Etienne was asking. And I think the central question we have to raise, and I mean that very serious, is to what degree was it our mistake? I mean, to what degree is it in our responsibility that now we have a growing part of the population voting for extreme right-wing parties, being certainly against any further democratic reforms, being against the enactment of all the European laws we have, for example, refugee laws we have, asylum laws we have. So I think it's not so interesting to ask what were the objective reasons for it. I think the better question to ask us is, what did we make wrong that we failed to articulate obviously the concerns and the anxieties of these people? And that's the same question that was asked at the end of the Weimar Republic. Yeah? I mean, looking back to the end of the Weimar Republic, I think every serious leftist intellectual would have to raise the question, what did we wrong not to be able to give representation, theoretical, intellectual representation of the concerns of these people? And I know that we all try. I mean, taking only the example of your own work, yeah? You try to articulate the concerns of those people who are disadvantaged, who are not on equal terms with others. And I can only think of very few things that we made wrong, but I think we have to take this possible mistake seriously. First, I think we underestimated, Etienne mentioned that, the deep belief in the security a nation can give. I mean, we were probably too quick with, I think of Habermas and Ulrich Beck and people like these intellectuals, too quick in emphasizing denationalization. I mean, I deeply believed that nationalism as a kind of deep feeling of people is disappearing. Yeah? There was an optimism, at least on my side, that the unification of Europe, but also other developments in the world, would indicate a direction where those national feelings, sentiments would disappear over shortly or longer time. I think we were wrong with it. And what we have to re-articulate is the place of a nation state within bigger political communities. So we have to, I think we have to reconsider what we said about post-nationalism and all these phrases we were using. Second, I think we didn't really were concerned sufficiently with, in the broadest sense, working conditions in our kinds of societies. We were concentrated on other inequalities probably. We were mainly interested, I'm not talking about identity politics, that's a big thing, but no, I mean it much more serious. I mean, we were very interested and we were very engaged for the emancipation of, be it ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, and all these groups suffering, deeply suffering from social injustices. And taking this so serious, and I think with good reason taking this serious, these struggles, we probably underestimated the private daily struggles the working class had to go through. And they felt out of our own, hopefully I'm not using the we a little bit too demanding here, I should speak of myself. I probably underestimated a little bit the worries of people suffering from working conditions which were changed to the negative since the neoliberal reforms that took place 30, 40 years ago. So the laboring conditions, the working conditions got worse in a time when I was probably a little bit more emphasizing the struggle of minority groups for their own rights and overcoming the specific injustices. Thirdly, and I'm coming to an end, we probably underestimated certain anxieties. One should take fears and anxieties more serious than I did. Yeah, anxieties, obviously, I mean, take the book by, forgot her name just right now, Strangers in Our Own Land, yeah, on the situation of white working class in the US. They have developed anxieties. They take each refugee which is coming into the country as an enemy from the first day on. We know it's a big mistake. It has ideological reasons. But probably we should take these anxieties more seriously and we should deal with it and we should incorporate in our own social theory much more reliance and relevance of such emotions of fear and anxiety. And I think I'll leave it with that even if I have more points on my paper here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Axel. You've touched on a number of important points there, and I'll go straight to Jonathan Wolff and maybe pick up on some of your thoughts, and in particular on the shorthand definition on the role of neoliberalism, and that obviously brings to mind Thatcherism and Reaganomics and Reaganism, and in demise, in the case of the UK, the north, and the closing of the coal mines. And I think I agree with Axel, the underestimation of the anxieties and fear of this majority. Through your work, and obviously you talked about this morning and gave us some very pertinent examples about those who are suffering or who have particular needs and anxieties. How do you see retrospectively, were you as optimistic as most of us were after '89, and was there a moment when that optimism failed?
So on that last question about 1989, I have enough trouble remembering what happened, what I was thinking in 2019, never mind 1989, so I'm not sure I had much optimism. I think as a general trend, I still share broadly the progressive idea that things have got better. If I think about the way the world was when I was born, which was 1959, we still had capital punishment in the UK. I remember seeing advertisements that advertised jobs with two rates of pay, one about 15% lower for women. There was no pretense women were doing a different job. There was just unequal pay, and that was the expectation in all levels of jobs. I remember my mother coming home furious from the shops because she wasn't allowed to sign a hire purchase agreement without my father's consent. So we have made a lot of progress that we've forgotten about. I mean, it never occurred to me I would see gay marriage in my lifetime. It just wasn't a thought that I had. So I see a lot of progress. But what I also see is not a simple line of progress. So it's a jagged line where we go forward and we go back. And I'm still hoping the general trend is forward, but I'm not always so sure. So I don't wake up with the same view every day. Neoliberalism is not a word I like very much, so I will just refuse, I think, that idea. I think there's a great confusion in the type of public economic mind between laissez-faire and free market or free competition. And that a lot of people understand the benefits of a competitive economy, and they identify it with a laissez-faire economy, which is an unregulated economy, whereas you need a lot of regulation to keep competition going. So I think there's this type of deliberate obscuring among a type of economic elite who are profiting from extractive economics and calling it competitive economics. So I think this is something we need to get back into the discourse, and the competition commissions, European competition law. So I think this is really important. We need to keep saying it, that markets need regulating if they're going to work. But picking up on the general themes, so I too am very worried about the rise of nationalism. The first book I ever reviewed was by Brian Barry, and there's a paragraph in this book which has stuck with me, and I'm finally going to write about it, maybe, I don't know how many decades later, where he says that when he was a student himself, the idea of nationalism was, I can never get this word right, inimical to civilized values. And he said the reason for that, or part of the reason for that, was that so many people who created political philosophy were themselves victims of nationalism. So they left Austria, Germany, the German-speaking countries, the socialists who had to flee. So we have a discipline that was created by victims of nationalism. So no wonder they didn't want nationalism to be a central category for them, and they just ignored it and hoped it would go away. But on this theme and about the revival of nationalism, the most important graph I ever saw about this was a presentation by one of my colleagues at the Blavatnik School of Government. And he is someone who moved from management consulting to new economics. And he said when he was a young man, he was working for one of the consultancy companies. And his job in the United States, he was an American, his job was to bust unions. Because he had been taught in business school that unions were bad for the economy. Unions were bad for union members, he thought. And so he had swallowed that ideology. I think he was working for McKinsey, and he was going around the US union busting. And he showed us a graph, and it was American figures, but there were three variables. Productivity, median wages of ordinary workers, and the income of the elite. And up to about 1970, they were in lockstep. They were all going up together. 1970 onwards, when he and his friends were doing union busting, as we were doing in the UK in the 80s, productivity carried on going up the same. So busting the unions made no difference to productivity. But what it did do was radically change income share. And what happened was that the elite massively went up like this, and real wages stagnated for ordinary workers. And this is in the US, and I think also in Germany, probably the UK. I don't know about France and Italy, but I don't see any reason why it would be significantly different. So what we've got is from the mid-70s, people are expecting their standard of living to go up, as it had done in the past, but in real terms, it's not going up very much, if at all. And they want something to blame. And you might think what they should be blaming is, one, extractive capitalism, where profits are being taken by the super rich. Two, technical change, which has eliminated a lot of jobs that were lucrative in the past, but even more so globalization. Because they were wealthy when most of China, people were living in poverty. So China has brought people out of poverty through stealing American jobs, as Americans would put it. But the problem is, from a normative point of view, given global economy and global justice, the rich countries really had no right to be rich. They're assuming that they have this right to be so wealthy. So what we've got are these three trends, it seems to me. I'm sure there are more. I'm not sure what their relative strength are. But the easy thing for governments is to blame it on immigrants, stealing the jobs, stealing the houses, overwhelming the services that actually, in my country, they depend entirely on immigrants. We couldn't run a health service without immigrant labor. But those are the people who are being demonized as making the waiting list too long. So what we've got, I think, is this sort of ideological takeover where things that we should really be blaming on the Republican Party are using this false discourse of immigrants taking our jobs, taking our services, as a way of reinforcing their own power. And this is giving rise to a form of nationalism. And this worries me. I think there are, importantly, strong and good forms of nationalism, particularly around the developing world and post-colonialism. So I don't want to say nation states have no role, but I think the way nationalism is used in wealthy countries to protect privilege needs further examination than it's got. Whether this will change anyone's mind about anything is another matter. So whether this is a way of convincing people. But I think, in a way, we've got a problem we can't solve. Because no policy at the moment is going to make ordinary people better off in terms of standard of living, unless we have a huge reshaping of the economic system. So that's my underlying pessimism, and Reaganism and Thatcherism were part of this by demonizing the unions, which just allowed redistribution from the poor, well, not the poor, but ordinary workers, to the wealthy.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. You touched upon points that I wanted to raise with you, in fact, that this rising inequality from the 70s, and we know that in the United States, and it figures with the numbers in Europe as well. The famous 1%, as we call it, has skyrocketed, whereas mean salaries have remained more or less level, and that, I think, has created the anxieties and fears that Axel and others have talked about. And also this terrible paradox that we need labor in all of these countries, including this one where bus drivers are now from Sri Lanka and Nepal, and construction workers are from India, Turkey, etc. So, it's an overall phenomenon where Europe is demographically stagnating and where we're losing labor to extent, and at the same time you have the need for labor, and then you have this anti-immigrant, and squaring the circle where the far right has used this fear is particularly noxious, I think. But now turning to Gazela, who is the spiritus movens of this whole conference and has done terrific work to bring us all together here. Gazela, you lead an institute of which I'm proud to be the chair of the board, but can you say, because you have mostly younger researchers, which I think is a huge quality in this day and age, what are the kinds of things that, as the French would say, qui les travaille, what's working in them to try and research and find out? And you gave an interview to the daily newspaper Danas, where you said that even the most rigid systems could be changed, and that we shouldn't, descend into a doom and gloom, that everything was dark and that there was no light. Could you comment on and maybe say a few words of what you were saying there?
Well, thanks a lot for the words and opportunity to speak with you here. Yes, that was the title which was actually chosen by the editor of the newspapers. It was not proposed by me, but it is interesting that it raised a lot of interest. I really believe that there is nothing that can prevent change. Now the question is change into what direction, with whom and how. And I think this conference is part of this thinking and trying to figure out how we could move towards the change toward better society. Now better society is the term which is, dubious. You can understand many different things under better society, but let's say that we here align with what Professor Wolf would say, just equal society as a better society. We gather here, and that is why this conference is going so well, I hope. that are your words. We are gathered here because there is a group of people who is working well together, and that is what is standing behind, and this is this group of younger researchers, as you explained and described us, that believe that there is some kind of mission into researching and going public with what we actually researched. And that's why I particularly liked what we were hearing today, because it aligns very much with what Institute stands for. We are the ones who are producing the knowledge. There is some kind of knowledge production that should be and will be, and it is used for to explain to the people what is happening around them, to help them understand that they have agency. I think that is the most powerful thing that we can do as researchers, especially researchers in social sciences and humanities, that we can show how agency of the citizens is something which is changing the things and changing society, starting from as in the social movement studies, they would say small victory is the beginning of the change. So we are showing in a way, by bringing different stories to the public, hopefully wide enough public, and that is part of not only staying within, as you said today, our research is staying under paywall, behind the paywall. Well, we try not to stick to the paywall, but to open everything. So open science, open research, and having published this for those who wouldn't usually be able to read it, in a way they can read it. So it's also how you communicate this. It's very important to us as a group. And this is something which we obviously nurture as a heritage of our founders, who also believed that there is something that philosophers in their case, or anthropologists or sociologists, can say to the society, and that there is specific kind of reputation they have, which is intellectuals, like as a figure, they can influence the society. And I think this still holds, in spite of social media, in spite of this noise which we have of different information, fake news, everything. I think still, and this is something I would say from the experience which we have at the Institute, there is still credibility and reputation which academic researchers, academic workers can bring to the society. And if we use this for the benefit of society, that can help. We cannot act as political actors, although many of us, and I see here a colleague who actually stepped from the academic realm to the political life, really harsh political life of Serbia, and I really admire that. That's important step. We need to be part of this change. And in order to be part of this change, we need to work together, we need to understand each other, we need to somehow understand that we are minority also. I think that's very important. In all this, what is happening in Europe also, in France, we are minority. And it's a question for us how we first understand that we are minority and to find a way how to first formulate the messages we want to send. I think that's also something which is very important in today's world. How we do it, and it's us actually who can help in this, because we know the concepts, we know what is the true meaning or behind the concepts that are used, and we can help into using this concept in the right way, because very often the blurring of the different concepts is something which is used from the other side, and we are the one who can help in clarifying this.
Gisela, thank you very much. Since time is running out and we stand between you and the famous cocktail, so I will try and make this last round short and punchy, and not ask you to look into the cliched crystal ball, but to maybe say some things that you wanted to say, but also to ask you how you see, not the crystal, what you see in the crystal ball, but what is your feeling in your respective environments, and where things are going. Are we really looking at a moment where Europe is facing a huge challenge, given, in particular, as I said, for me, the French elections are really a kind of a make or break. Of course, the world will still be there, Europe will still be there, but Europe has a declining population, which will be 5% of the world in about 10, 15, 20 years' time. It has a strong economy, but there's a China that wants to tailor the world to its own ways. It has lifted, like India, so many people out of poverty, and that's the flip side of what we've seen here. So that's been positive news, that people are living better in what we call, for better or for worse, the global south. And something that I think that Europe is and should be paying more attention to. So, Etienne, je me tourne vers vous. How do you see the predicament that we stand in at this moment?
I wish I could say something simple or clear. Forgive me if I continue in the pessimistic manner that I've already used before, and some of my colleagues as well, because you refer in a very central and specific manner to the question of Europe. I mean, how do we see it? In which sense do we believe that the politics we want to contribute as a European politics and not just separate in each country, and what are the challenges? There are two things that are haunting me in a sense. I mean, for a long time now. But the first is I experience with great worriness and anxiety a huge paradox. I mean, Axel and Jonathan referred to their early experiences. I'm a little older than both of them, but we are roughly of the same generation. I remember that at the end of the past century, in the 90s even, and perhaps above all, after the end of the great division of Europe between the two blocs of the Cold War. And when the European Union was taking shape as a federal or quasi-federal project, I was deeply, and also perhaps because I had spent my life traveling to the neighboring countries, speaking Italian, Spanish, German, English, and so on. Unfortunately, never Russian. Or so I was deeply convinced that we would witness an increasing intensity, I would say, and commonality of political life across the borders of the different European countries. And so, of course, this took place and realized itself but in a very limited manner among a narrow and extremely privileged. We're losing our privileges now, but we remain privileged people, the academics. I mean, when I find myself with you in Belgrade, with Petar Bojanic, with Axel Honneth, with others, we more or less use the same language, we share the same problematics, concerns, we really belong to the same world. But this has not become true, far from, at the level of the population at large. I mean, the masses. And of course there are reasons for that we all mentioned already, economic, social, and so on. So this is the absolute paradox, because Europe really is the only level, the only territory, the only space, political space, as Carlo Galli would say, where the great problems of our time can be addressed. But that excludes, in fact, there's no European citizenship. And I've been too long, and the second thing I want to say is that geopolitically, of course, Europe should be an important player. But the thing that is obfuscating and the horizon is now entirely governed by the perspectives of war, and this is the absolute antithesis of any real political life. So I'm extremely pessimistic, I have to say.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Axel.
Yeah, it would be probably not the right thing to simply continue where Etienne stopped, but I could continue. The last time I spoke with Habermas, which is not long ago, he told me that he is not longer able to even recognize the world any longer. I mean, this is probably what every very old important philosopher is saying about his or her own times. Yeah, maybe Hegel said the same thing at the end of his life. And you know probably the one photo from Schelling, which I really love. Schelling was 85, I think, and people were able to make a photo of Schelling, and you can't imagine having a photo of Kant or photo of Hegel, but we have a photo of Schelling, and Schelling looks into the camera as somebody who is not longer able to understand what's going on. And sometimes I feel like that, and probably Etienne is feeling like that, because we grew up in a time, and he was exactly right in describing the atmosphere, where we were in the deep belief that borders will be overcome. So borders will not longer be a central experience of our children. And now what we see is a militarization of borders, yeah? So we experience the opposite of what we expected. So what I shall say on a more optimistic, in a more optimistic tone, and you hopefully, or you probably want me to end with more optimism. I think I take it as being right to say that we have to blame ourselves. As long as the left is not able to organize people sufficiently, namely those of which we think we are speaking for, and that are the working masses, probably not longer the industrial worker, but all the post-industrial workers in Europe and in the world, as long as we are not able to find not only a theory, but a language which addresses their concerns sufficiently, we will be experiencing backlash and regress all over. So I think what we have to do is we have to come together from Great Britain, from France, from Italy, from Germany. This is West Europe, which was once the hope of my youth. Yeah? When I grew up, I thought that will be unified territory. So I think we have to come together and reflect on where we probably made a mistake.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Okay, thanks so much. So I recall, I've just been reminded through this discussion, people in the 1990s writing articles saying that the nation state is too big for some purposes and too small for others, and therefore would be obsolete in the long term. So we need to concentrate on regions, and we need to concentrate on federal. Okay, so that hasn't happened. But what it does remind us, though, is that people live on different levels. So people are members of a state, but the work I've done recently, thinking about people as citizens of a city, and people think differently as a citizen of a city than they do as a nation. And what we've found is that, we go back to this word I said I wouldn't use, neoliberal. Cities are much less neoliberal, typically. I mean, maybe there are some exceptions, but on the whole, cities want to do the right thing for their people. They want everyone in the city to be able to have a good life if they can, and so on. So you have something much more like a democratic liberalism at the level of a city, even though you might have at the level of the nation and the multi-nation in economic terms a whole different thing. So people are living on different levels, and I think we need to understand that they don't have simple views. They have quite complex views. And just to pick up this point, who speaks for the public? So who does speak for the public? And work I've done on other subjects where one of the things I did was on railway safety, and very far from here, but the railway industry had decided that the public believed something. Now, why did they believe that? Well, because the newspapers were printing it. But when we actually looked at what the public believed, they didn't believe anything like they were reported to be believing. But we had to do in-depth interviews for this, because if we just did tick box surveys, people would just put anything down or unconsidered views. But once you talk to people and get them to express their view and think about it, it turns out human beings are pretty reasonable. And there's much more convergence in views. So I think we haven't really got the drill down. Now the book you mentioned, I think it was Yali Hochschild, one where she did try to go down. These people had incredibly complicated views. So you had people who were executives they were working for oil and gas companies, but they were also environmental crusaders. So the same person had that incredibly layered and divided self. So I think we have to do more. Probably the Institute is doing this, so maybe now's the time to hand over to Gisela, either to contradict me or continue the thought.
I can only continue. I fully agree on you. I mean, we very frequently see that, especially from the surveys that we get here in our region, comparative surveys made somewhere else, that we see things that doesn't really have sense. Our people are not really coherent in their beliefs, and even in their values, they are not coherent. And that's a situation. And instead of pushing this and trying to push them, we actually should change our apparatus and think differently about our people. And I think this, what you said about being different thinking, that we have different thinking on the level of the city is definitely true. When we do, for example, our institute is working on citizen assemblies, and you gather representative sample of the people, 100 people, for example, here from all over Serbia, and you see that they can articulate themselves very well. You know, they are not politically illiterate. They just do not have an arena where to voice themselves. And that is something which our democracies, our states, our societies are actually failing at. We need somehow to get closer to these people, to understand the complexity they are living, and try to bring solutions. I think the solutions are really important, although our academics are not there to bring solutions. We are there to bring analysis, and somebody else should maybe, or maybe not, bring solutions. But we can list the areas of solutions which citizens think they should be there in place. And that's something where we can help. And I think this is enormously important work that we have ahead of us that is purely research academic work. And this is something where we can contribute, and I think we can help.
Thank you very much, Gazela. Just very few thoughts at the end. Of course, the 1989 Zeitenwende or epical change was one where, as Axel and Etienne said, was one in which there was a feeling that Europe was coming closer together. I personally, if I may say so, never thought that the nation state would disappear, that the French would always eat camembert and the Italians would eat spaghetti and the Scots would eat... Yes, absolutely. And of course, what happened to us in former Yugoslavia was we thought an exception, but we were the harbinger of the nationalism and identity politics that was to come in the worst way possible. So whether we say the nation state is back or it's never gone is one level, but the other level, as most of you mentioned, was that the nation state is too small a unit to solve the issues of climate, of technological revolution, of demographics, of security and defense, again, just thinking of the Russian invasion. There's a whole way in which the world is thinking about what goes next. And of course, on democracy and freedom is, I think Gazela mentioned, I mean, it's about getting up every day and defending your freedom. And if I dare say, I think that's what the Ukrainians are doing. They don't want an invader in their living room. I don't think anyone wants that. So, you know, let's see how we can strengthen our democracies. And the only way to do that is not with help from outside, but by ourselves getting our act together. Not easy. Easier said than done. Finally, I just once again come back to the Institute for Philosophy and Social Science, which has been a beacon of academic freedom and critical thinking, which is absolutely necessary in any democracy. And the fact that we have this crop of young and not so young researchers tackling some of these subjects in different ways and looking at citizens' assemblies and ways in which citizens can have voice, I think is to be applauded. And one must add, the state and the presence of the minister here proves that we have been able over the past 4 years to have the support of the relevant authorities. This is a time when one needs to stand and be counted. I hope that we all understand, and we're speaking to the converted in this room, that this is what it is all about. So please join me in thanking our panel, and I invite you to the cocktail downstairs.